Since the atomic age began, many have wondered how world events would have played out if the atomic bomb was never dropped on Japan during World War II. Would Japan have surrendered without further bloodshed? What path would atomic energy have taken in our lives? The rationale behind using the atomic bomb on Japan was that it would help speed along the end of World War II.
A better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past.
It was never doubted that the end would come or that Japan would fall, well, at least after Midway in June 1942. After that, it was just a matter of island hopping all the way to Japan. By 1945, the last Axis power standing was suffering the effects of a naval blockade and a devastating firebomb campaign. The Battle of Okinawa cost the Allies dearly, but it was a crippling defeat for the Japanese. Morale was broken in many corners of the country. The question then is not whether Japan would have been defeated without the bomb, but how and at what cost. It might have been done peacefully. The Japanese government was trying to find a way out of war by 1945. Their objection wasn't to surrender, but to an unconditional surrender that might expose Emperor Hirohito to a war crimes trial. In other words, they wanted to surrender on their own terms, and that just wasn't going to fly in the eyes of the Americans. Significant elements of the Japanese military wanted to continue the fight, even if it meant utter ruin for their country. Death to them was preferable to surrender of any kind. Had they prevailed, World War II might have continued on for at least another year, with tens of thousands of casualties on both sides before Japan was fully defeated. This is still debated to this day. Was it really necessary to nuke Japan? There's certainly debate on either side, but it's important to remember that it took 2 bombs before they surrendered. Joseph Stalin was unimpressed by the atomic bomb, at least at first, according to foreign policy. He put more stock in armies and their mentality, but he was aware of the US atomic program well before Hiroshima and did covet the bomb as a status symbol. It's unlikely to change in a timeline where America never deploys nuclear weapons against Japan, but had bombs never been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or had they been detonated away from population centers as a warning, the proliferation of nuclear weapons would have played out very differently than our own history, one where Soviet espionage brought them atomic power by 1949. Demonstrating the power of the atom without widespread loss of life might have made international control over atomic energy, as proposed in the Baruch Plan, more feasible. But that assumes Russian disinterest in negotiations would be any less under those circumstances, just as likely as a world where the Cold War superpowers both have bombs without an example of their use in combat to act as a deterrent against setting more off. In such a world, the first bomb dropped may well have been during the Korean War, or the Vietnam War, or in any conflict of the 20th century where Cold War tensions drove hot clashes. In such a scenario, the first use may have inspired restraint afterward, but the bomb would have proliferated much further by that point, and hostile powers may have been unwilling to keep it in check if their enemies used it first. Much has been written about the possibility of a German nuclear program developing an atomic bomb before the US.
This kind of uncertainty only served to fuel fears that the Nazis might be closer to building a bomb.
In reality, the Nazis were never going to beat the Americans in that race, nor did they make much effort to do so. But what about the Japanese? Could the only nation to have experienced the horrors of atomic warfare become the first to hold the bomb had things gone another way? Bunsaku Arukatsu, a Japanese physics professor, was approached about developing a nuclear bomb. Materials related to Arukatsu's efforts were covered in 2015, as Japan was confronting difficult questions about its military and civilian nuclear programs. They included blueprints for centrifuges and a targeted date of August 19th for their completion. Arukatsu's work is one of the only surviving pieces of evidence regarding Japan's nuclear ambitions during the war. Most were probably destroyed after the surrender. Japan lacked the uranium needed to produce an atomic weapon, and its efforts to obtain it through its colonies did not come together in time. But had they been able to secure enough, and if US bombings hadn't disrupted tests, Japan could have produced a bomb, and they may well have used it against Allied forces if given time to finish their program. Nuclear weapons on their own likely wouldn't have reversed Japan's lagging fortunes in 1945, but they could have prolonged World War II and intensified the horrors of the Pacific theater. Hiroshima and Nagasaki left a deep psychological scar on Japan. While government policies since World War II have dealt with the ambiguities of a nuclear-armed world where Japan's only defense ally is the United States, anti-nuclear sentiment is high throughout the country. Indeed, many Japanese, including survivors of the atomic bombings, have felt betrayed by the government's evasiveness on the issue. Japan's nuclear energy program did not begin until 1966, and the 2011 Fukushima disaster prompted a fresh pause on utilizing atomic energy. But it has been suggested that without the twin horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan could have moved on to peaceful nuclear energy much sooner. In a world where America never dropped the bombs or demonstrated its power without casualties, Japan would still surrender to the United States and rebuild after the war. In this scenario, it would have embraced the peaceful use of nuclear energy. It might even have taken a leading role in innovating civilian uses for atomic power, free as it would be in this case from the memory of its darker purposes.